And welcome to the Spiritual Forum. I'm so glad you're here. I'm going to do something different today. I just wanted to share with you the presentation that I did at the retreat that I led last weekend. The theme was a world that works for all. It's a whole planet spirituality forum and retreat, and we are in our fourth year. We hold this at Unity Village, and I'm telling you, it's magical. Something happens there. People just really open their hearts and connect. And we all go away as just kind of a higher vibration person. And so I really encourage you to think about coming next year. You can also attend virtually. And every year I have a different theme. Every year I create something completely new. I have a new keynote speaker, a different theme, different art. It's at the same place, generally the same food, but everything is every year it's a different. If it's a different experience, and and our theme, a world that works for all, came to me, and I decided that I was really being called to talk about the creative process and how do we create a world that works for all? How do we create anything? And I was reminded of a sermon series that I did back when I was leading church in the Chicago area. I did a sermon series. It was like 7 weeks. It was on the creative process. And I used this book called The Creative Life. And I thought I would share that with you today. But first, I just want to talk a little bit about why we call this retreat whole planet spirituality. And it's because we come together as a group of spiritual peoples, spirit centered people. There are some atheists and some agnostics, and there's people with Hindu tradition and people who are unity and Christian, all kinds of people. But generally, it's a spiritual place. And so, whole planet spirituality is a spirituality that includes the whole planet. And so much of our religions exclude animals and excludes the the trees and the insects and all the other beings that we share this planet with. So whole planet spirituality is a spirituality that includes everyone. And it's loving kindness and the golden rule as applied to everyone on this planet. So I believe that God, spirit, source energy, the energy under all that is brought forth into manifestation on this planet life in so many unique ways, and said it was all good. We are not here to dominate this planet. We are not here to have power over animals or have power over each other. We are here to create ways to work in harmony and to celebrate and create a world that works for all, with all including all beings on the planet. So it's really recognizing that all beings have their own purpose, not just humans. And this, of course, challenges tens of thousands of years of cultural conditioning. We've been trained to think otherwise. We've been trained to think that we humans are superior, that we are the ultimate creation, and that we have license to do whatever the hell we want on this planet. And even those that don't believe that, still many of us are completely blind to how we exploit other beings, namely the animals on this planet. And there's an environmental devastation going on with deforestation and pollution in our seas. I can go on and on and on, but there are species who are becoming extinct, and this horrific thing that we do to animals in factory farms and slaughterhouses, it really just isn't our divine nature. So we're trying to call people back to the divine intention and who we were created to be. So, the theme of the retreat was a world that works for all, and that is a mighty, mighty vision. But we are creative beings. We created the state that we're in now. So, when we look out and we go, don't like it, it looks insane out there. We created it. We are responsible in that our consciousness created that. We create with our thoughts, we create with our beliefs, we create with our words, we create with our actions. And what we see now is what we've created. So, how can we create a world that works for all, for everyone? And at this retreat, I have to say, we had pretty like hearted, like minded people there. And even we weren't all the same. We don't all have the same vision for what that looks like. And it's no surprise. I mean, first we have to ask ourselves, is it possible? I believe that it is. And then we have to go kind of go, what would that look like? Because how are we going to get there if we have so many people who have so many different ideas and so many different belief systems, so many different values, and they're just people who aren't necessarily on board with creating a world that works for all. And there are many who want to create a world that works for me or who wants to create a world that works for my people, whether that's my political affiliation or my race or my whatever it is. We all have our groups. So we can envision creating a world that works for our own group, but what about everybody else? And what do we do even if we have a fairly homogeneous group with the same value system? Even that group has differences. So how do we create a world that works for all, even when we're in a group that has similar values? So we of course we can't really do it now because if we could, we would. So it's because of the conscious level we're at. We're at this consciousness that's created the division and the craziness that we see out there in the world now. So this is consciousness work. Right now, we live in a war paradigm. You may or may not be for war, but so many of our daily activities are seen through the lens of a war paradigm. As an example, our medical business, we see invaders in our bodies, and we see that we have to put armies in our bodies in order to fight the invaders, and it's just like a medieval war. And that's because we see through that lens of a war paradigm. Our politics, we see there's this other side on the front, and we need to shore up our defenses, and we need to be offensive. We need to get them here and get them here. We need to annihilate those people. I mean, our politics is two sides. And I need to do a whole podcast on that because it's all so contrived and so fake. But that aside, it's because we accept this war paradigm that there's always an other that we have to fight. All right. So as long as we stay in this war paradigm, we will create the world that we see. It is filled with division. It is filled with the annihilation of people and species and slavery and exploitation, all of that, because there's a dominance. There's a dominance that we believe in, and that we're at war, we're always having to survive. So what we must do is raise our consciousness. And pretty much everything on this podcast is about raising our consciousness because a new consciousness will reveal a new world that will indeed work for all. So we have to all be working on our consciousness. And that's really the center of what I wanted to get across at the retreat. And I want to get across to you as well, and why my podcast exists. So I shared this creative process that was based on a book by Reverend Eric Butterworth, and the book was called The Creative Life. And basically, it's about how we create ourselves and also how we create anything in our lives. We may create a project, an art form. We may create a new movement. Any way that we are creating, it's patterned after the creation story that is in the Bible in the first book of Genesis. And just hold on if you got a problem with the Bible. I think I had a problem with the Bible once. I wanted to throw it out. But once I realized it can be looked at in a more metaphysical, metaphorical, symbolic way, there were so many jewels in it that had been hidden that I was able to see. So what I want to do is just do a little metaphysical Bible interpretation of the first chapter of Genesis. And this is where we take stories in the Bible beyond their literal interpretation, and we look at metaphorical perspectives. What do certain people, places, and things represent? And that's what we're going to be doing to find the hidden spiritual insights. And first, I want to look at the book of Genesis, chapter 1, which is the 7 days of creation. And the idea here is that the way God creates in Genesis, God, the source, the great mystery, whatever your name is for that which is under all of creation, that breathes us, sustains us, guides us, comforts us, all of that, that brought forth creation in the story in 7 distinct steps. And I think it's really interesting. For me, it's powerful to look at these steps because I can look at, all right, what do I need to work on a little bit more in order to more fluidly create? And and where are my obstacles? So until you can kind of look at the pieces of how we create, we really can't look at what we can do to make it flow better. So if you remember in the 7 days of creation, God creates light and then a firmament, and then the water and the dry lands and the plants appear. And then on the 4th day, there's lights in the dome. That's believed to be the sun and the moon. On the 5th day, we have swarms of birds and fish. And on the 6th day, the creatures of the earth are created and humankind is created. And on the 7th day is Sabbath. All right, I'm not asking you to believe this literally. You can. You also don't need to in order to just walk through this metaphysical interpretation. It's a wonderful story, and I believe it reflects how humankind creates. So each of these 7 days of creation represent 7 different steps in creation or keys to our creative process. So light represents illumination, firmament represents faith, the water, the dry land, and the plants represent imagination. The 2 great lights represent understanding and will. The swarms of birds and fish represent the synchronization and discernment process. The creatures of the earth and humankind and male and female represent our divine nature and the divine intention. And the Sabbath represents rest. Now, it's important to remember that every time we create something, it starts from nothing, the void, a blank space. And that can be uncomfortable for a lot of us. And it can also just be uh, this field of potentiality where it's a sacred space that's just waiting to be filled with spiritual activity. So the darkness, the in between, the void, is the sea of potentiality that is waiting for the light, which is the first step. On the first day of creation, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And when we look at our own creative process, light represents illumination. And let there be light is like the illumination within me. And it's being aware of the presence of spirit. It's awakening our consciousness, and it is receiving insight and ideas and inspiration and guidance. The first step of creation is the idea. The light bulb goes off. Let there be light. We receive illumination and we receive it from the divine realms. So the first day, light, illumination, that's the first step. The second step is the firmament. And in Genesis, God says, let there be a firmament in the midst of the waters. And this is like a barrier. And the firmament represents the spiritual gift of faith. Faith is essential whenever we create anything. We have to believe in it. We have to know it. And in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, there's a wonderful, wonderful scripture that describes faith so beautifully. Faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. So when we have an idea and we think it's a good idea, in order for it to come into fruition, we have to believe it. We have to have the ability to take hold of that idea. And even though we don't see any evidence of it existing now, we have to believe it. It's an essential process of creating this inner knowing. It's not about logic. It's not about learning. It is, I know. So anybody who's ever experienced love, you can't really prove it, but you know it. When you receive divine guidance, you can't really prove it, but you know it. So like for me, I know that we can create a world that works for all beings. And I know we can restore ourselves to being caretakers of this earth. I know that. Now, faith is something that we aren't lacking in. Some people say, "Oh, I don't have much faith." Well, yeah, you do. You have faith in what you put your faith in. And so what's really important is you can is to look at what do you know? What do you believe to be true? Because you can believe to be true, life sucks, it's horrible, it's hopeless, I'm a victim. That's where you put your faith. Or you can put your faith in life is wonderful. It's just full of beautiful challenges and lessons, and something wonderful is happening right now. You can put your faith there. And you put your faith here, you create one kind of life. You put your faith here and you create another kind of life. Now, on the third day of creation, it says, God says, let the waters be gathered together unto one place and let dry land appear. Let the earth bring forth grass and herb that yields seed, and the fruit tree that yields fruit according to its kind, whose seed is in itself of the earth. So, this is the appearance of something material in the midst of this kind of primordial soup. And this appearance of the material is represented in the creative process as imagination. And imagination is our ability to picture. So when the dry land appears, there's a mental image that forms, and it's like formed thought, and it's the ability to see what can be beyond what is. So we can picture this, we can imagine, image it from within versus just take a snapshot of what is what is out there in the world. Imagination compels us to kind of move forward, but it can also be a little bit tricky, which I'll talk about in just a minute. But remember, we can imagine ourselves as successful, or we can imagine ourselves as a failure. And imagining ourselves as successful is a lot more interesting, right? And so if we look out into the world, we can imagine that, an apocalypse, we can imagine Armageddon, we can imagine the doomsday, which, turn on the TV, you'll see it. Because there's new apocalyptic movies coming out all the time. And it actually, those movies, they cause our imagination to go into that darker space. The other thing we can do, though, is imagine something that's much more beautiful and connected, and that we really are living in harmony and living in accordance with the golden rule. And we can have faith in that vision and imagine it, and that will create a completely different outcome than what we have now. So I just want to pause for a minute and recognize or point out to you, as I have in other podcasts, that there's a trap of imagination, because imagination can compel us forward, and it can be so exciting. We kind of ride the clouds of imagination without thinking anything through. We can find ourselves in somewhat disastrous situations because our imagination pulled us forward and didn't think about how we're going to go about anything, which is like the next step of creation. So imagination can trap us by causing us to just take actions without really thinking about it. But picturing also just kind of takes us out of the present. It compels us into the future, which if all of the eternity of life and the peace of the presence that we experience in the presence, when we're imagining, it takes us out of that. My conversation recently with Guy Finley pointed that out. So I still think imagination is incredibly useful. We just have to hold to our vision and also hold to the beauty of what is, even if we don't like it. So we got to stay in the present while we imagine some kind of future. The other thing that imagination can do is it can really cause us to feel angst because the present just doesn't look like we want it to look like. And we imagine something different, and then we're constantly in this state of frustration. So that's why it's so important to hold the tension of what is, as well as our vision when we are imagining. And it really is an important aspect of creating. So in day 4, back to the story, there are 2 great lights, and it says, God said, let there be lights in the firmament to divide the day and the night, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. Again, these are believed to be the sun and the moon. And metaphysically, these represent our spiritual gifts of understanding and will. Now, this needs to be coupled with imagination, because remember I said imagination kind of propel us forward, and if we don't think about it, we might find ourselves in a place that we just hadn't planned for. And understanding is looking at what really is the reality, looking at what stands under what is right before us. So we need to understand what is true, what is required, and what is required of us to move towards the vision. We also must understand what our abilities are, and we must understand our divine nature in order to really take this divine idea of illumination at all and have faith in it. And then will is that motivation to move forward. It's being in action, and it's the driving force of life. And we can see all sorts. We get all sorts of great ideas, and we can understand what we need to do to make it happen. But if we don't activate our will, everything stops there. Our will propels us. It's that driving force. It's our action. It is our saying yes. It is our willingness to move forward. So understanding and will is seeing everything that's there, seeing what is ours to do, and then being willing to do it. All right, day 5 of creation in Genesis is let the water swarm with living creatures. I love this step. It seems a little obscure at first. Like, what is swarming? And have you ever seen videos of the birds? I think they're swallows. I can't remember what they are. They're amazing, and they just thousands of them. They gather and they just start flying together in these amazing shapes, and they don't bump into each other. There's no bird going in the opposite direction. They're all just kind of going in the same general flow, and it's like they've got some intelligence that is way beyond what any of us have. This is called the synchronization process, all right? So the swarms that are created on day 5 of creation represent our synchronization of all sorts of thoughts and ideas that come to us as we move forward in our creative process. So synchronization is about attracting ideas of the same frequency, of the same direction. And it's the process of organizing all of our thoughts so that they can flow together in this beautiful synchronicity. There is an intelligence that transcends individual thoughts, ideas, and abilities, just as there's an intelligence that transcends an individual fish or an individual bird when they swarm and synchronize together. And so this takes discernment. So, this 5th day of creation, the swarms, represent synchronization and discernment. And discernment is that power within us that's vital to the synchronization process, because we must be able to discern what is of the same frequency, what idea or thought that we have fits in the general direction that we're going. And we must be able to eliminate some and accept others that we might not have originally intended. And this is a very, very co-creative process. And I find myself in the swarming process a lot, where so many ideas are coming to me, and I have to look at, does this fit with what I'm doing? Does this fit with the direction I'm going? Does this fit with the theme that I'm trying to create? Does this fit with the energy that I want to have people experience? And you've got to go, yes and no, yes, yes, no, no, no. And maybe this is for later, but I'll accept that. And that's the whole swarming process of our creative process. So, day 6 is when God creates the creatures of the earth, male and female, and the image and likeness of humankind. All right, so before I go any further, I want to make a big deal out of the fact that in this story, day 6, animals, the land animals, and the people animals are created together. They're created on the same day. Humankind did not get its own day. So all these crazy ideas that we are somewhat dominant, superior, that we are way above, and that we are here to do whatever we want with the other animals that were created with us on the same day, I think there's a fallacy there. In fact, shortly thereafter in this story, God tells everybody, and here is your first, he said, everything is good. And here is your ideal diet. You are to eat seeds and fruits, and you're to be in peace together and living in this beautiful space called Eden. So that was the original intention of God in Genesis. So there's nobody out there that can say that we are here to dominate. No, we are here to be in beautiful, beautiful connection and collaboration and stewardship with all beings. It's very clear in Genesis 1. So on the sixth day, and God said, let the land produce living creatures according to their kinds, the livestock, the creatures that move along the ground, and the wild animals, each according to its kind. And then let us make man in our image and after our likeness. Sidebar, that plural of our deserves a whole podcast on its own. And you can learn more about it in a fabulous book called The Gods of the Bible. All right. So, what is this image and likeness thing about? What is this male and female and the animals all about? What does it represent? And I mean, I think image and likeness really represents the step in our creative process where we have to look at our are we allowing the divine to come through us? Are we allowing is what we're creating the image and likeness of the divine? Is it a divine intention? Is it the male and female? Is it balanced? Are we co-creators with a responsible state of being? Um, is our vision reflective of spirit? And there's so many ways that our own creative process can go awry because we can be very willful and make it about us or make it about our group, make it about our people, make it about our politics, make it about our beliefs, our ideas, and not being inclusive. And we have to stop and check and say, is what I am creating here through those first four steps and now here, is what I am creating here the image and likeness of the divine? Is this divine intention? Is it balanced? Am I allowing the divine to come through me? So, an example that I used at the retreat was in Scotland, where they took millions and millions and thousands of acres of beautiful trees, God's creation, the greatest CO2 capturers that exist on the planet. And in the name of green energy, they chopped them all down and put up a big wind farm, which is made of steel, huge solid waste problem in the long run, horrible for the birds. Who knows what else it's causing? But was that the divine coming through? Was that idea really balanced? Was that the image and likeness of the divine? Or was that kind of a willful, egoic attempt to do good under the auspices of something called green energy? I think that's a really good example of a willfulness and kind of an anti-divine solution. In the seventh day of creation, God took a rest. It's called the Sabbath, and this is the seventh step of our creative process. On the seventh day, God finished his work which he had done, and he rested. Now, what's so important about this is if you look at the first 6 days of creation and then the seventh, you notice that every single day of creation starts with let there be, let there be, let there be, let there be. There's no, and I'm going to make. There's no, and you're going to do. There's no forcefulness. It's all about letting, let. And then the seventh day is rest. So the whole creative process is about letting and resting. And again, we are constantly creating. We could be creating a relationship. We could be creating a project at school. We could be creating a nonprofit or some sort of art project that we're always creating. We could be creating a fence around our pool. We could be creating a garden. Uh, all of our creative endeavors go through these 7 steps of creation. So I want to ground this now in an example. The steps again are illumination, faith, imagination, understanding and will, synchronization and discernment, looking at balance and divine nature, intention, and then rest. So, just really quickly, I'll just go through like how I create my retreat. All right. So, the very first retreat came from a conversation in a car, a conversation I had with Victoria Moran, and it was an idea. That was illumination. Let there be light, illumination, first step. And then faith is really the next step. Do I know that this is possible? Do I know I can do this? Do I know that this is a reality that's only separated from me by time? Do I trust spirit? Is this divine intention? Yes, that's my faith. I know it. And then I start picturing what could it be like? Imagination. I'm using my imagination to picture all sorts of different outcomes and how it could be and where it would be and all of that. And then understanding and will is that process of, okay, I've got to kind of understand all of the realities are there before me and really, really know that and really know that what it is that I must do or not do. And then ask myself, do I have the will to make this happen? And when the answer is yes, I have the will to make this happen, then what's so interesting is magically all of these ideas start coming. That's the synchronization and discernment. I could do this, I could do that, I could do this and that. People can chime in with, why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? Hey, I can do a presentation. I can do a presentation. And this whole synchronization process is what I have to go through to discern, what fits with my theme this year, what fits with the ideas I want to convey, what fits with what I want people to learn, what fits with my goals for this retreat. And that takes discernment and saying, maybe this will belong in another year, maybe that belongs in another year, maybe that doesn't belong at all, and accepting the ones that all synchronize around this general idea of what this retreat's going to be. And then all along the way, I've got to kind of question, all right, is my ego in this? Is this the intention of the divine? Am I reflecting the divine? Come back to that illumination, the idea, and checking to see is what I'm creating here a beautiful creation that's in balance and that isn't willful. It isn't my will, but thy will, God's will. And then the last step is rest. And when I got back from the retreat, believe me, I rested for 3 solid days. But really, rest should be happening along this whole process. And I want to also point out that this process is not always chronological. It's not always 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Sometimes it's 3, 2, 1, 5, it goes all over the place. So it's not like it has to be one step after another. So the reason I'm going through all this is because ultimately, this creative process we can use to create ourselves as new people who can create a world that works for all. We have to have an idea of ourselves that we can do this. We have to have faith that we can do this. We have to have a picture of what we want to create. We have to go through all the steps in order to create ourselves. Remember in the beginning I said we can't see these solutions because we're not at the level of consciousness that is required in order to see it. So I just want to ask a few questions, reflective questions of you that I'll leave you with. And that is just to look at your own consciousness as to where it is. Recognize that what we've created is a reflection of our consciousness. So that pretty much tells us the consciousness that we're at. So in order to receive illumination and idea, the question also is like, where does our inspiration come from? We need to not be looking in the outer world at news sources and experts and TV and movies and whatnot. We really need to come within and make that very clear connection with the divine and be in prayer and meditation so that we can receive ideas and inspiration. And so we should be in active cultivation of that connection. I asked you to take a look at your faith. What do you have faith in? You can look at your life and kind of just ascertain what that is. Do you have faith in yourself that we can create a world that works for all? Do you have a faith in yourself for any projects that are before you? Or do you have faith in things just not working out? So faith is so important, that knowing that we can be these high consciousness beings and we can create something different. What world do you dare to imagine? As we look at it, what is, what do we dare to imagine? And who do we dare to be? Because it does take courage. It does take a daring sense to picture something completely different than what is. And that kind of comes to the picture. How clear is it? How fuzzy is it? Are we picturing Armageddon all the time because our movies and our media are reminding us to do that? Or do we say no to that and we have a different picture of a possible reality that's beautiful and connecting and harmonious? And then we have to look at what are we willing to do and what changes are we willing to make, because we have to change. Each one of us has to change our consciousness in order to create something different. And in order to create something different, we have to be different people. So what are we willing to take on and what are we willing to give up? What changes are we willing to make? And all along this process, we have to be honing our discernment. Discernment is so important. That is that judgment of knowing what is the right thing to do and what is not the right thing to do. And then ultimately, does this vision we have reflect the divine? Are we open to the flow of the divine as we co-create with the divine to create a new world? So that's generally what I presented at the retreat. I did this to kick off the whole retreat because the theme was a world that works for all. That's a creative thing. And that together we were kind of working and collaborating. And in that swarming process, the retreat itself was that swarming process where everyone's bringing these ideas together. And so to me, this was kind of the cornerstone, the bedrock of any co-creative process, to really understand the steps that we go through. And these are all divine gifts. I just bless your journey as you are a creative being, as you create your life, as you create your relationships, as you create yourself, and as together we create our world. Namaste. Thank you for listening.